Hello. One of the most interesting times in my life I spent in Germany. Uh, I went there first during the Cold War period. That was the period that followed the World War II, where the American occupation was in Germany as a result of them losing the war. And as an American living in Germany, I got to see a world that was quite different from what we experience in the United States. At the time, the city was divided. I lived in Berlin, and the city was divided. There was the east and the west side, and the east was the communists because the Russians had claimed that for themselves, and the west was the Americans, the French, and the Canadians, so the Allies, who were there to protect the interests of democracy because the communists were moving quickly. They took a whole slice of Eastern Europe and claimed it as theirs. So it was, of course, a very troubled time politically and socially. It's a very sensitive time, and I needed to get away for a trip. I felt, I always wanted to live in Europe, and it was one of the places I'd considered. Of course, everyone thought when I came of age, I just wanted to live in Paris. In fact, my older brother, ended up living in Paris. He still lives in France. Uh, but I thought, had that sort of cliche in my head too. But then the first time I went to Europe, and I did go to Paris. I went to just one city in Germany called Hamburg, and I got to Berlin I got to Berlin by accident, but I had such a good time in Amsterdam when I went there my junior year that I decided I was going to go live in Amsterdam, And the first kind of boyfriend I had was Dutch, and I still remembered him. The fond 2 or 3 weeks I spent in Amsterdam when I was 20. Anyway, fast forward, I was going to take sort of a sabbatical. I'd worked on a big PR project. I was just, kind of ready to get out of New York, and I had published my first novel the year before. So it was like I felt a time that, if I was ever going to be an artist, it was time for me to get out of show business as a working publicist and, you know, pursue the idea of going abroad and perhaps writing there or at least getting inspiration. And so anyway, I went to Amsterdam, but Amsterdam proved to be too small. It's a very little town ultimately, and I just felt very cramped and very threatened by the traffic, both the automobiles and the bicycles, kind of. Make you keep you on your toes. So I met someone who was staying at the pension where I was staying. He was another American. He had just come in from Berlin, and he told me I should go to Berlin. He said because Berlin was a um, city that Hitler had rebuilt to widen the streets so the armies could march. And my biggest concern was feeling very cramped in Amsterdam. So anyway, of course, there are all the legends about Berlin and all the Isherwood stories and just everything you've ever heard about Berlin. So of course there was that attraction as well. And a few days later, I got on the train. I headed to Berlin, and it turned out to be a great experience. And as a result of that experience, I've written a novel based on the years that I was living in Germany. And I think that it tells a very interesting story, a point of view perhaps not often shared, a African American expatriate uh, talking about his experience in Cold War Germany, East and West Berlin before and after the Wende, and the lives and loves and losses uh, that he experienced. It is a made up story, but it's based, like I said, on there's some historical accuracy, of course, because it was a very important period in the in the late 20th century, because Germany, let's face it, dominated the 20th century, and if it looked like they were going to about to take power again, but then Volkswagen screwed them. Anyway, that's an outtake. So good. So there's my first attempt at doing a YouTube uh, introduction to my book, basically. And I think it's a, I think one had to self-publish. There just doesn't seem to be a realistic way to write and to also be the businessman that you must be in terms of getting an agent, getting a publisher. Uh, I remember doing that so much, in my 20s and 30s, and I managed to publish my first novel not because I had an agent and not because all the 24 houses that initially turned it down, one came back and decided they would publish it, but it was based on the fact that one of the editors had been introduced to me through a very good friend, a relatively influential friend who sort of said you must read Owen's book, and so I was published. There was very little expectation when I was published. It was published on thinking that it would be one of the books they were going to lose money on, but of course to balance their books that always looked good. But to their surprise, when because of my job as a publicist at the time, the New York Times uh, editor, then Cy Peck, the cultural editor, I believe, he liked me, and I told him about my book. He said, "Well, bring me over a copy, and I'll see if we can do something." And sure enough, I think maybe like a week or so later, this review popped up in the daily paper, written by Newgate Calendar, who I didn't know at the time was also their music critic, Harold Schoenberg. So by this rather restrained but complimentary review about my book, made it an overnight success. It sold out around the country. I heard literally bookstores, everyone would know, well, what is this book? What is this book? So I liked hearing that because that's the way, you know, as a writer, you want people to read what's written. And so now comes my second novel, some 35 years after my first. So as I recently joked, Harper Lee has nothing on me because it took me a while too. But I think you have to wait for inspiration. Of course, not that I haven't been writing. I did write other, but they weren't ready. They're still gestating. So, things are timely as well. But at any rate, Goodbye Haiku, Goodbye Berlin is my latest effort based on the years I lived in Berlin and the political, social, cultural, uh, sexual um, mix that is Berlin. Because for someone like me, there's a certain freedom or a certain laissez-faire about life in Berlin. One did not feel living in Berlin that because one was gay, one was a social outlaw. It just it just was normal. So that was good. Anyway, if you have any questions, you may certainly drop me an email or send me a video. I'll be very glad to answer. And please pick up the book. I think you will find yourself quite amused by this take on Berlin in the late 20th century.